Billionaire saw that his underachieving daughter was secretly being tutored by some street urchin and flew into a rage. But when he learned the whole truth, his decision left even his security guards speechless. My world is built on three things: concrete, steel, and results. I'm Arthur Vance, and if you live in New York City, you've slept, worked, or dined in a building my money erected. My penthouse on the Upper East Side isn't a home, it's a watchtower. From the 68th floor, through floor-to-ceiling glass, Manhattan spreads out below me like a circuit board I happen to own. Every skyscraper is a monument to a deal I won, a competitor I crushed. I don't believe in luck. I believe in leverage, in clear-cut wins and definitive losses. Everything is an investment, measured by its return, including my own daughter. That morning, the city was shrouded in a pearl gray mist, but the view inside my apartment was brutally clear. The report card lay on the solid marble breakfast bar between me and Chloe, a flimsy piece of paper that felt heavier than a block of granite. It wasn't just bad. It was a declaration of war against my entire philosophy. C's, D's, and in math and physics, two subjects built on logic and absolute answers, a pair of galling F's. An F. To me, an F wasn't just a failing grade. It was an act of fiscal irresponsibility. I was shelling out nearly $60,000 a year for her to attend one of the most elite private schools in the country. And this was my return on investment. "Explain this to me, Chloe," I said, my voice dangerously low. I didn't yell. Yelling is for people who have lost control. I maintain control. I tapped a polished fingernail on the calculus grade. "Your teacher notes a fundamental lack of engagement." What am I paying for exactly? The privilege of you not engaging in a classroom that costs more than a starter home in Ohio? Chloe, my 17-year-old heir, just stared at the marble countertop. Her shoulders were slumped inside an oversized college sweatshirt, her long, dark hair curtaining her face. She was a ghost in my minimalist palace of glass and chrome. For years, I had seen her this way. Withdrawn, quiet, a beautiful but bafflingly underperforming asset. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," I commanded. Her eyes, a deep, soulful blue, just like her mother's, flickered up at me for a second before dropping again. They were filled with a misery so profound, it looked like a permanent condition. She couldn't articulate it. She never could. I'd hired psychologists, academic advisors, lifestyle coaches, a whole team of specialists to diagnose and fix the problem of Chloe. Their reports were all the same: perfectly healthy, highly intelligent, just unmotivated. "I tried," she mumbled, the words barely audible. "It's just hard. I don't get it." "You don't get it?" I scoffed, the sound echoing in the sterile silence of the room. "You have a private tutor who's a PhD from Columbia. You have every resource, every advantage. What you don't have is the will to succeed. That's a choice, Chloe. It's a character flaw." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the cold marble. It was time to apply leverage. "All right, here's the new deal. The summer trip to Europe with your friends? Canceled. The trust fund supplement you get every month? Frozen, effective immediately. You will spend your summer with a new tutor every single day, until these grades are A's. Period. I didn't claw my way up from nothing and build $1 billion empire for my heir to be a failure. This name, Vance, means something. It's on you to live up to it, or you will have nothing to inherit." A single tear traced a path down her cheek and dropped onto the marble with a tiny, soundless splash. That was it. No shouting, no pleading. Just that silent, infuriating surrender. I took it as acceptance. I straightened my tie, grabbed my briefcase, and walked towards the elevator, my footsteps sharp and decisive on the polished concrete floors. The head of the car service is downstairs. Let him know your new summer schedule, I said without looking back. I expect results, Chloe. The bottom line is all that matters. Of course, I didn't see any of this next part at the time. I learned it all later, piecing it together from fragments of information that would eventually shatter my world. What I now know is that the moment the elevator doors sealed me in my Armani suit, Chloe finally moved. But she didn't call the car service. She walked past the landline that could summon a black town car in under 3 minutes, past the wall of windows displaying her gilded cage. She tugged a simple, nondescript beanie over her hair, pulled on a pair of worn sneakers, and slipped out the service entrance. She bypassed the doorman and the waiting drivers on Park Avenue, walking 3 blocks east to the 86th Street station. She swiped a Metro card and descended into the loud, chaotic, beating heart of the city I only ever saw from above. The metallic screech of the train, the humid press of humanity, the cacophony of a dozen languages. It was a world away from the climate-controlled silence of her chauffeured life. Her train rumbled over the bridge into Queens, into a neighborhood whose name I wouldn't have even recognized. It was a place of brick walk-ups, colorful storefronts with hand-painted signs, and the constant thrum of life lived on the pavement. She walked a few blocks to her destination, a branch of the public library. It wasn't like the grand, hushed halls of the one on Fifth Avenue. This place was buzzing. The ancient fluorescent lights hummed a weary tune, the air smelled of old paper and disinfectant, and the tables were crowded with people of every age, all seeking a quiet corner in a loud world. She found him in the back, near the reference section, a young man, maybe 19, with a shock of unruly dark hair and the kind of intense, focused eyes that seemed to burn a little brighter than everyone else's. He was wearing a faded hoodie and jeans that had seen better days, but he commanded his small space at the worn-out oak table with an air of absolute authority. This was Leo. I now know he saw her approaching, and a slow grin spread across his face. "You look like you just wrestled a bear," he said, his voice a low, friendly rumble. Chloe managed a small smile as she slid into the chair opposite him, dropping her backpack to the floor. "Worse," she said. "A quarterly review with the CEO." He chuckled. "Your dad? The demanding middle manager?" "The very same," she lied. And the ease with which she said it would have sent a chill down my spine. She pulled out her calculus textbook, its pages already filled with the neat, useless notes from her expensive PhD tutor. She opened it to a chapter on derivatives. "He's threatening to cut me off if I can't figure this out." Leo didn't even look at the book. He pushed it aside. He grabbed a cheap, thin paper napkin from the dispenser on a nearby shelf and took a pen from behind his ear. "Forget the book. Look out the window," he said, pointing towards the elevated train tracks visible between 2 buildings. "You see that train coming? It has a speed, right? A velocity. But what if you want to know its speed at one exact moment? Not over a second, but in an instant. That's all a derivative is. It's the instant speed of a change." He started to draw on the napkin, not with abstract symbols, but with pictures. He drew the curve of the track, a little box for the train, arrows for its motion. His pen flew, sketching out the problem in a way that was visual, tangible. He didn't talk down to her. He didn't treat her like she was broken or stupid. He argued with her, challenged her. "No, don't just tell me the formula. Tell me why it works. What's it doing?" And as I was sitting in my corner office, barking orders and moving millions of dollars with a phone call, A different kind of transaction was happening in a dusty library in Queens. A spark of understanding was being passed across a table. I could picture it now. Chloe's eyes, usually so clouded with despair, suddenly widening. A flicker, then a flame. The first real spark of understanding I'd failed to ignite with a fortune's worth of elite tutors. For the first time, the foreign language of mathematics was being translated into something she could speak. She was learning not because she was being threatened, but because she was being engaged by a charismatic street urchin who saw a puzzle to be solved, not a defective product to be fixed. I went to my office that day feeling resolute. I had laid down the law. I had set the terms. The ball was in her court now. I was confident I'd broken her apathy, that my tough love approach would finally yield the results I demanded. I had no idea that Chloe had already found a solution that had nothing to do with me, my money, or my power. And that, more than anything, was a variable I had never learned how to calculate. It started with the small things, the kind of subtle shifts in the data stream that would make a stock trader's hair stand on end. In my world, you don't get rich by looking at the headlines. You get rich by noticing the tremors before the earthquake. And with Chloe, the tremors were starting. For a week or two after our last fight over her report card, the atmosphere in the penthouse was thick with a familiar, sullen silence. But then, the quality of that silence changed. It was less about misery and more about secrecy. She'd started spending more time out of the apartment. Before, her social life was a predictable calendar of pre-approved outings with the daughters of my business associates, trips to the same 4-block radius on the Upper East Side. Now, her excuses were vague. "I'm going to the library," she'd mumble, not meeting my eye. Or, "I'm studying with a friend." She'd be gone for hours, always declining the black car service I paid a fortune for. "I'll take the subway," she'd say, a statement so alien in our world, it was like she'd announced she was taking a rocket ship. At first, I chalked it up to teenage rebellion. But something else was happening. Her shoulders, usually slumped in a permanent posture of defeat, seemed a little straighter. There was a quiet confidence in her eyes I hadn't seen before. It wasn't happiness, not yet. But it was the absence of that deep, listless despair that had become her defining feature. My initial analysis was simple. She was seeing a boy, an unacceptable boy, judging by her need for secrecy and subway travel. It was an annoyance, a variable to be managed, but not yet a crisis. The crisis arrived via a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of closing a 9-figure deal on a midtown high-rise, my focus absolute. My assistant buzzed me, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Vance, it's a Mr. Albright on the line. From Chloe's school? He says it's important." I took the call, irritated at the interruption. Albright was the school administrator, a man whose voice usually carried the apologetic tone of someone about to ask for a large donation. This time, he was practically giddy. "Mr. Vance, I just had to call you personally," he began. "I'm not sure what's changed, but we are seeing a remarkable improvement in Chloe's academics, especially in her STEM subjects. Her latest calculus test score, well, it was one of the highest in her class." I was silent. The words registered, but they didn't compute. My mind, honed by decades of navigating corporate backstabbing and hostile takeovers, doesn't process miracles. It processes angles, schemes, and leverage. Sudden, inexplicable success isn't a gift. It's a red flag. It's the sign of a cooked ledger, a hidden partner, a lie. "Remarkable how?" I asked, my voice flat. "Well, Her methodology, her approach to the problems, it's just so much more insightful. It's a complete turnaround, he gushed. I thanked him mechanically and hung up. I stared out my office window at the Manhattan skyline, an empire of concrete and steel I had bent to my will. I built it all on one principle. Results are earned through brutal effort. They don't appear out of thin air. My daughter, my heir, was not capable of a remarkable improvement in calculus on her own. The data was clear on that. Therefore, the data was being manipulated. She was cheating. My rage was a cold, precise thing. It wasn't the hot flare-up I'd had with her in the living room. This was a calculated fury. This wasn't just about grades anymore. This was about deceit. It was about someone getting one over on me, on a Vance. And it was happening under my own roof. I called Frank. Frank has been my head of security for 15 years. He's a wall of a man, with a face that seems carved from granite and a loyalty that has been tested and proven a dozen times over. He doesn't ask questions. He provides solutions. "Frank," I said when he entered my office, "I have a delicate situation. It involves Chloe." He just nodded, his expression unchanging. "She's been lying about her whereabouts. I believe she's involved in something. Dishonest at school. I need to know where she's going, who she's meeting. I need to know everything. But it has to be discreet. She can't know." "Understood, sir," he said, and left. The problem was now in motion. I just had to wait for the intel. The first reports were maddeningly benign. Frank's texts were short and to the point. 15:30. Subject has entered Queensboro Plaza Station. 16:05. Subject has entered the public library on Astoria, Belde, Queens. 18:45. Subject remains at library. Appears to be studying. Queens, a public library. It didn't make any sense. Why would she travel 45 minutes on the subway to an underfunded, overcrowded library in a borough she's only ever seen from the window of a town car? My expensive private tutors had failed her in the silent, climate-controlled comfort of our home. What could she possibly be accomplishing there? The incongruity of it all grated on me. "Is she alone, Frank?" I texted back, my thumb pressing hard against the screen. The reply took a minute. "Negative. She is with a male, approx 19 years old." There it was, the unknown variable, the accomplice. "Who is he?" I demanded, my voice a low growl in the empty office. I paced back and forth, the plush carpet doing nothing to soften my mood. "Frank, who is she with? I need a name, a face. I need to know what his angle is." The surveillance became more focused. The next day, Frank didn't just text. He sent a photo. It was grainy, taken from a distance. Chloe and this boy, this subject, were not in the library. They were in a cheap-looking diner, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and sticky-looking menus. An old, beat-up textbook was open between them on the table, next to a shared plate of fries. Chloe was laughing. It was a genuine, unguarded laugh I hadn't heard in years. And the boy was looking at her, a small smile on his face as he gestured toward the book. I zoomed in on him. He was thin, dressed in a worn hoodie and jeans that had seen better days. He had the sharp, lean look of a kid who'd had to fight for everything he had. My mind filled in the blanks instantly. He was a street urchin, a nobody from the outer boroughs who'd sniffed out an opportunity. He saw my daughter, with her expensive coat and lost expression, and saw a meal ticket. He was either seducing her, manipulating her, or more likely, doing her homework for cash. He was feeding her the answers, and she was foolish enough to believe she was actually learning something. The very thought made my blood boil. The insult was twofold: his audacity in targeting my daughter, and her naivety in falling for it. That evening, I tried to confront her. I waited until our housekeeper had retired and the penthouse was silent. Chloe was in her room, music humming faintly from behind the door. I walked in without knocking. She looked up, startled, pulling off her headphones. "Dad, what's wrong?" I couldn't show her the photo. I couldn't reveal Frank. So I was left with vague, angry accusations that sounded weak even to my own ears. "I want to know what's going on, Chloe. This sudden improvement at school. These long trips to the library." I put the word in air quotes, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Her face immediately hardened, the familiar defensive mask dropping into place. "I've been studying. That's what you wanted, isn't it?" "Studying with who?" I pressed, stepping closer. "Who is this friend you're suddenly spending all your time with in Queens?" A flicker of panic crossed her eyes, quickly replaced by defiance. "He's just a friend. He's helping me. That's all." "Helping you? Or giving you the answers? Is that it? Did you find someone to do the work for you?" I was goading her, trying to break her down, to force a confession. "How much are you paying him? Out of the allowance I give you?" Her jaw tightened, and she stood up, a rare spark of fire in her eyes. "He's not like that. You wouldn't understand. He's the only one who's ever actually helped me see things clearly. He's a good person." Her defense of him was all the confirmation I needed. The more she protected him, the more certain I became that he had some kind of hold on her. My naive daughter, defending the hustler who was playing her for a fool. The rage in my chest coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't a teenage problem to be managed anymore. This was an infection, and it needed to be cut out. I had the target identified. Now, all I needed was the right moment to cauterize the wound and remove this kid from her life, and mine, for good. The email landed in my inbox with a soft, unassuming ping that belied the explosion it would detonate in my life. I was in my home office, a glass and steel cage overlooking Central Park, the city spread out below me like a circuit board I knew how to manipulate. The subject line was from Chloe's calculus teacher, Mr. Albright. A quick positive note regarding Chloe Vance. I leaned back in my leather chair, a smirk touching my lips. Positive. It was about time. My constant pressure, the threats about her trust fund, the canceled trip to Paris. It was all working. She was finally getting the message. The bottom line in life is results, and she was finally producing. I opened it, expecting a perfunctory, "She passed her latest quiz." But what I read made the blood drain from my face, replaced by a hot, coiling rage in my gut. "Mr. Vance." It began. "I'm writing to you personally because I am, frankly, astounded. Chloe's turnaround in my class is nothing short of remarkable. It's not just that her test scores have skyrocketed, but her entire approach to problem solving has shifted. The way she deconstructed the fundamental theorem of calculus on her last exam was insightful, elegant even. It showed a depth of understanding that I have not seen from her all year. It's as if a light has been switched on. Whatever you are doing at home, please keep it up." I read the email 3 times. Astounded, remarkable, insightful, elegant. These weren't words used to describe my daughter's academic performance. Ever. They were words used to describe a professional, a con artist. My mind, honed by decades of navigating corporate backstabbing and hostile takeovers, saw this for what it was. This wasn't improvement. This was fraud. The so-called friend she was meeting, the urchin from Frank's grainy photos, wasn't just helping her with homework for a few bucks. He was a professional. He was feeding her advanced, sophisticated solutions. He was making me, Arthur Vance, look like a fool to the faculty of one of New York's most expensive private schools. He was playing me. The rage was no longer coiling. It was a white-hot furnace. I slammed my laptop shut. This boy, this nobody from some forgotten corner of Queens, was orchestrating a conspiracy using my daughter as his pawn. What was his endgame? Blackmail? Siphoning money from her allowance? Getting his claws into the Vance family fortune? Every scenario was uglier than the last. He wasn't just cheating the school, he was undermining my legacy. He was poisoning my air. "Frank," I barked into my phone, not even waiting for a hello. "I need you, now, and bring Mike. We're going for a ride." My head of security was, as always, a man of few words. "On my way, sir." I didn't even change out of my suit. I strode through my penthouse, the polished marble floors echoing my fury. I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking app I'd reluctantly installed on Chloe's device for emergencies. A red dot pulsed steadily on the screen. The location tag read, Elmhurst Community Center. Of course, not a library, not a school. A glorified rec room in a part of the city people like me only flew over. It was perfect. Public, anonymous, a place where a grifter could operate without scrutiny. The ride over the Queensboro Bridge was a blur of steel and furious thoughts. Frank drove, his stony eyes fixed on the road, while Mike, a mountain of a man who usually guarded my office building, sat beside him. The silence in the black Escalade was heavy, vibrating with my unspent rage. Frank knew my moods. He could probably feel the heat coming off me. He glanced at me once in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "Sir," he said, his voice a low, gravelly tone, "perhaps we should approach this with a degree of discretion." "Discretion is over, Frank," I snarled, my eyes locked on the red dot on my phone. "This is a hostile extraction. This parasite has burrowed deep enough. Tonight, we're cutting him out. For good." The community center was worse than I imagined. The air was thick with the smell of cheap floor cleaner, stale coffee, and damp coats. The sound was a chaotic symphony of shouting kids in a distant gym, the tinny beat of music from a dance class, and the low hum of a dozen conversations. It was the antithesis of my world's curated silence and order. It was messy. It was common. And my daughter was in the middle of it. I saw them through a large glass window set into the wall of a study room. The sight stopped me dead in my tracks, my prepared speech of righteous fury catching in my throat. It wasn't what I expected. There was no furtive exchange of cash, no whispering in a dark corner. A tall, lean young man, it was the boy from the photos, Leo, was standing at a large, scuffed-up whiteboard, a marker in his hand. He was dressed in worn jeans and a faded hoodie, but he moved with an energy, a passion that was captivating. The board was covered in a complex web of equations and diagrams, a language I hadn't tried to speak since college. And Chloe? My daughter was not the sullen, withdrawn girl I yelled at over breakfast. She was on the edge of her seat, her eyes bright, alive. She wasn't just listening, she was arguing, pointing at the board. "No, wait," I could just make out her voice through the glass. "But if you apply the limit from this side, wouldn't the derivative collapse? It doesn't account for the asymptote." She was animated, engaged. The sight was so foreign, it was like watching a stranger. For a split second, a crack appeared in my anger. But then it sealed over, harder than before. This was the performance. This was the sophistication Mr. Albright had written about. This kid wasn't just giving her answers. He was teaching her how to act like she understood. It was a deeper level of deception than I had even imagined. That was it. I pushed the door open so hard it banged against the wall, making everyone inside jump. The dozen or so other people in the main room turned to stare at the three of us. Two imposing men in black suits, flanking a third who looked like he could chew through steel. Leo and Chloe spun around, their academic debate instantly shattered. Chloe's face fell, the light in her eyes extinguished and replaced by the familiar look of fear and dread. "Chloe," I boomed, my voice echoing in the suddenly quiet space. I pointed a finger at Leo. "Get away from him, now. This is over." I strode into the small study room, Frank and Mike filling the doorway behind me like two human roadblocks. I turned my full, undiluted fury on the boy. He looked barely 19, maybe 20, with sharp, intelligent eyes that didn't waver. He wasn't intimidated, the audacity. "And you," I spat, my voice low and venomous. "Listen to me very carefully. Whatever you think you're getting from my daughter, the deal is off. Your little scheme is finished. Get out of her life. And if I ever see you or hear from you again, I will use every resource at my disposal to make you wish you'd never been born. Do you understand me?" Tears were welling in Chloe's eyes, but through them, something new was hardening. "Dad, stop it. You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I shot back, not taking my eyes off Leo. "I'm talking about a hustler who preys on vulnerable girls." "He's not." Chloe's voice rose, stronger than I'd ever heard it. She stood up, putting herself between me and Leo. For the first time in her 17 years, she wasn't cowering. She was defiant. "He's the only person who has ever actually helped me. The only one. You wouldn't understand, because you never even tried." Her words were a slap in the face. Me? I hadn't tried. The tutors costing $500 an hour, the top-tier schools, the threats designed to motivate. "That's enough," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I looked past her to the boy. "Your time is up." I nodded to Frank. "Get him out of here." Frank took a step forward, his expression impassive. But just as he reached for the boy's arm, Leo spoke. His voice wasn't angry or scared. It was perfectly, unnervingly calm. "Mr. Vance," he said, meeting my gaze directly, "I'm not being paid. In fact, I'm the one who is in debt." He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a small, worn leather wallet that looked like it had been through a war. From it, he carefully extracted an old, folded piece of paper, creased and soft from being carried for what looked like years. He held it out to me. "I'm tutoring Chloe to honor the person who gave me a chance," he said softly. "Your late wife, Eleanor Vance." I stared at him, the name hitting me like a physical blow. My breath hitched. With a trembling hand, I took the paper from him. I unfolded it. It was an official-looking letter, the letterhead slightly faded. At the top, in elegant script, were the words, "The Eleanor Vance Memorial Scholarship for Underprivileged Youth." My eyes scanned the text, but all I could really see was the signature at the bottom. The familiar, looping, graceful signature I hadn't seen in 5 years. The signature of my wife. The letter informed a young man named Leo Martinez that he was the first ever recipient of a full scholarship, a small private fund she had established before her passing. A fund I never knew existed. The world went silent. Not the quiet of my penthouse, which was an engineered absence of sound, a deadened space that cost a fortune to create. This was a different kind of silence. It was dense, heavy, and absolute, as if someone had sucked all the air and noise out of that small, stuffy room in the community center. The furious energy that had propelled me here, the red-hot rage that had been boiling in my gut for weeks, just evaporated, gone. In its place was a cold, cavernous void. My hand, the one holding the flimsy, folded piece of paper, was trembling. I could feel the faint tremor travel up my arm, a foreign sensation in a body I had always kept under disciplined control. My eyes were fixed on the bottom of the page. It wasn't the typed-out grant information or the official-looking seal of the community fund that held me captive. It was the signature. Eleanor Vance. Her name. My late wife's name. It was written in her familiar, elegant script, a confident loop on the E, a sharp, decisive cross on the T. I'd seen that signature on 1,000 documents, charity gala checks, art acquisition forms, our wedding license. Seeing it here, on this worn letter pulled from the wallet of this kid I was ready to destroy, felt like seeing a ghost. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was her. A piece of her I never knew existed. The Eleanor Vance Memorial Scholarship for Underprivileged Youth. Eleanor. My Eleanor. She had set up a scholarship, secretly. I managed billions of dollars in assets. My entire life was a ledger of profits and losses, of acquisitions and liquidations. I knew where every single dollar of our estate went. Or so I thought. This fund? It was small, insignificant in the grand scheme of our finances. It was a rounding error. But it was hers, and it was a secret she had kept from me. Slowly, I lifted my head, my neck feeling stiff, ancient. The kid, Leo, was watching me, his expression not triumphant, but patient, expectant. My daughter, Chloe, stood half behind him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her face pale but her chin held high. The defiance was still there, but it was now laced with a raw, painful vulnerability. My gaze drifted past them to the doorway. To Frank, my head of security, a man carved from granite and loyalty who had worked for me for 15 years. I'd seen Frank remain utterly impassive, while a disgruntled contractor threw a chair at my head. I'd seen him calmly disarm a crazed protester who had lunged at me with a box cutter. In all that time, I had never seen his face look the way it did now. His jaw, which was usually set like concrete, was slightly slack. His eyes, normally narrowed in perpetual assessment of threats, were wide. He was staring, not at Leo, not at Chloe, but at me. The other guard beside him looked equally stunned, like he'd just witnessed a magic trick he couldn't explain. The sight of their shock somehow validated the chaos swirling in my own head. If Frank was speechless, then the world truly had been turned upside down. The silence spun out, stretched thin. The buzzing of the old fluorescent light above the whiteboard suddenly seemed deafening. Then Chloe spoke, and the fragile quiet shattered. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "None of it is." She stepped out from behind Leo, taking a deep breath as if preparing to jump into freezing water. The fire was back in her eyes, but it was a different kind of fire now. It wasn't just anger at me. It was the desperate light of someone trying to finally be understood. "I'm not stupid, Dad." The words hung in the air. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. "All those years," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "All those tutors you hired, the ones from Columbia, from Yale. They would just get so frustrated. They'd say, 'Just focus, Chloe,' or 'It's simple logic.' They'd look at me like I was lazy, like I was broken. And you looked at me the same way." A fresh wave of shame, cold and bitter, washed over me. She was right. I had seen her grades as a reflection of her effort, of her character, a failure of will. Leo was the first person who didn't, she said, glancing back at him. The first day we met right here, he watched me try to work through a problem for 10 minutes. I kept mixing up the numbers, writing a 7 instead of a 1, a 6 instead of a 9. The equation on the page felt like it was swimming. And he didn't get mad. He just said, "Hey, hold on. Has anyone ever talked to you about dyscalculia?" Dyscalculia. The word sounded foreign, clinical. It meant nothing to me. It sounded like an excuse. My mind, still reeling, tried to categorize it, to file it away under something I understood. "It's a learning disability," Chloe said, as if reading my mind. Her eyes were pleading with me to understand. "It's real. For me, numbers, they don't make sense the way they do for other people. It's like my brain is on the fritz whenever I look at an equation. The expensive tutors you paid for just kept throwing more and more equations at me, faster and faster. It was like they were trying to cure my drowning by holding my head underwater. Leo, he helped me find a way to swim." The room tilted. All the pieces of the puzzle, all the confusing fragments of the past few months, slammed into place with brutal clarity. Her secrecy. The remarkable improvement that I immediately assumed was cheating. The confidence. It wasn't about a boy, or money, or rebellion. It was about survival. She had found a lifeboat, and I had been trying to sink it because I didn't like the look of its captain. The letter in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. My wife, who I always thought was so transparent, had a secret life of quiet charity. My daughter, who I had branded an underachieving failure, was fighting a battle I never even knew existed. I had been living in a house with 2 strangers. My own voice, when I finally found it, sounded rusty and hollow, like it belonged to someone else. I looked at my daughter, at the young woman she had become while I wasn't paying attention, and a single, devastating question pushed its way out of the wreckage of my pride. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Chloe, why didn't you ever tell me?" I expected tears. I expected anger. I expected an "I tried, but you wouldn't listen." What I got was far worse. Chloe's face didn't crumble. It hardened. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a deep, ancient hurt that seemed to age her by a decade right before my eyes. She looked at me, the billionaire, the titan of industry, the man who built an empire on cold, hard numbers and unforgiving results. And she delivered the final blow. "Because I knew you'd see it as just another failed investment. A month can feel like a lifetime, or in my case, it can feel like the first real month of my life." The man who had stormed into that dingy community center didn't exist anymore. He'd been a ghost, a shell company of a man, and he'd been liquidated in a single, gut-wrenching moment by a folded, worn letter and a single, devastating sentence from his own daughter. "Because I knew you'd see it as just another failed investment." That sentence had been playing on a loop in my head for 30 days. A constant, humbling reminder of the man I had been. Today, I stood in that same community center, but it was hardly recognizable. The stale smell of dust and old linoleum was gone, replaced by the crisp, invigorating scent of sawdust, fresh paint, and the promise of something new. The drone of power saws and the rhythmic thud of hammers echoed from the far wings of the building, a symphony of renewal. Scaffolding crisscrossed the main hall, and drop cloths covered patches of the floor, but the central area had been cleared for the press conference. A small podium stood before a handful of chairs occupied by local reporters, community leaders, and a few curious faces from the neighborhood. It wasn't a Wall Street Journal event. It was better. It was real. Frank stood off to the side, his hands clasped behind his back in his usual stoic pose, but his eyes were different. They weren't scanning for threats. They were watching me, a flicker of what I could only describe as cautious pride in them. Chloe and Leo stood in the front row. Chloe wasn't hiding behind her hair anymore. She stood tall, a small, confident smile on her face as she squeezed Leo's hand. Leo looked overwhelmed, his eyes wide as he took in the cameras and the official-looking backdrop behind the podium. He was still wearing his usual jeans and a simple collared shirt, looking like the same kid from the diner. But now he stood on the solid ground of a future he had unwittingly built. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone, the slight feedback screech making me flinch. I cleared my throat, the sheaf of papers in my hand suddenly feeling like a prop. I'd rehearsed this, but now, looking at my daughter's face, the script felt hollow. I set the papers down. "Good morning," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "My name is Arthur Vance. For most of my life, that name has been associated with skyscrapers, with acquisitions, with results, with building an empire of steel and glass. I measured my life in square footage and profit margins. I thought that was what it meant to build a legacy. I was wrong." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. I could feel the reporters shifting, sensing this wasn't the standard corporate philanthropy announcement they were expecting. "A legacy isn't built from the top down," I continued, my gaze finding Chloe's. "It's built from the ground up. It's not about the height of your buildings, but the strength of your foundation. And my foundation was cracked. I was so obsessed with building an empire for my daughter that I never bothered to build a relationship with my daughter." Chloe's eyes glistened, but she held my gaze, giving me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Go on, Dad. It's okay." "I learned recently," I said, now looking directly at Leo, "that the most valuable investments aren't listed on the New York Stock Exchange. They're the investments you make in people, an investment made not for profit, but for potential." I picked up a single sheet of paper from the podium. "Some of you may know that my late wife, Eleanor, was a quiet but passionate advocate for education. Before she passed, she established a small private scholarship. A little seed of hope she planted, hoping it would one day grow. Leo, here, was the first recipient of that scholarship. He honored my wife's investment in him by paying it forward, by helping someone else who was struggling. He helped my daughter." I saw Leo swallow hard, a blush creeping up his neck. He wasn't used to the spotlight. He was used to the quiet corners of libraries, the anonymous hum of a community trying to better itself. "Leo didn't see a billionaire's daughter," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I no longer tried to suppress. "He saw a brilliant young woman who learned differently. He saw past the labels and saw the person. He succeeded where I, with all my resources, had failed catastrophically. He taught me that a balance sheet can't measure a person's worth. And so, today, I am not here to announce a one-time donation. We are not just renovating this building. We are laying a new foundation. I am officially announcing the formation of the Vance & Son Foundation." A murmur went through the small crowd. I saw Leo's head snap up, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at me, then at Chloe, as if to ask if he'd heard me correctly. "Son." The word hung in the air between us. It wasn't a legal adoption. It was a testament, a recognition. He was the son I never had, the kind of man I wished I had been at his age. "This foundation," I declared, my voice resonating with newfound purpose, will be dedicated to one mission: ensuring that no child, regardless of their zip code or their learning style, is ever made to feel like a failed investment. We will fund programs for students with learning disabilities. We will create and support tutoring networks in underserved communities across this city. We will champion the idea that every mind is unique and every single one has the potential for greatness. I let that sink in before delivering the next part. An organization of this magnitude requires a leader with vision, empathy, and a true understanding of the mission. It needs someone who has lived it. That is why I am immensely proud to name Leo Martinez as the first executive director of the Vance & Son Foundation. The room erupted in applause. Leo just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Chloe threw her arms around him, laughing through her tears. He looked utterly, completely shocked, as if I had just told him he'd been elected president. I knew, in that moment, I had made the single best business decision of my entire life. But I wasn't done. The reporters were scribbling furiously, the cameras flashing. They thought they had the headline. They were wrong. "Now," I said, holding up a hand to quiet the room, "you might be wondering about my role in all this. I will be chairing the board, of course. But my company, Vance Properties, has a more than capable leadership team. And frankly, I have some catching up to do." I looked over at Frank. His expression was unreadable, but I saw his shoulders tense slightly, anticipating something. Even he didn't know what was coming next. "Effective next month," I announced, "I will be taking a semi-sabbatical from my duties as CEO. I've discovered a profound gap in my own education, one that no amount of money can fill. So, I'm going back to school." The silence in the room was absolute. Not a cough, not a shuffle of paper. I could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. I saw two reporters look at each other with their eyebrows raised to their hairlines. Frank's jaw, for the first time since I'd known him, actually dropped. His mouth opened slightly, and he stared at me as if I'd just grown a second head, speechless. I had finally done it. "I'll be taking courses," I finished, a genuine smile spreading across my face, "in child psychology and educational development. Because it's time I learned how to build something more important than a skyscraper. It's time I learned how to be a father." Later, after the flurry of questions and the handshakes, the three of us stood alone in the main hall. The construction crew had packed up for the day, and the evening light streamed through the tall, arched windows. A large blueprint for the new citywide tutoring network was unrolled on a makeshift table. We stood over it together, a team, a family. Leo pointed to a location in the Bronx. "We can convert the old warehouse on 149th Street. It's huge. We could build a state-of-the-art learning lab there. And we can partner with the local high schools in Brooklyn," Chloe added, her finger tracing a line across the map. "We can create a peer tutoring system, connect kids who get it with kids who need that extra push." I watched them, my heart swelling with a feeling so foreign and yet so right. It was pride. Not the arrogant pride of a deal closed, but the deep, quiet pride of a father watching his children build a better world. I reached out and put my arm around Chloe's shoulder. She leaned into me instantly, naturally. The gesture wasn't possessive. It wasn't a claim of ownership. It was just support. A simple, solid, unbreakable connection. For the first time, I wasn't just her father. I was her dad.